is Redux here, once again with another episode. Now, just to quickly preface before we go any further with this episode, I do want to just make it clear that I am recording this straight after the second episode. I've had about an hour's break in between, but if anybody's left any comments and I don't address them in this episode, I apologise in advance. It's just that I've got to record whenever I have the time, and I just happen to have time because it's a bank holiday weekend, so I'm going to be recording a bunch and trying to fit them together in episodes. I also apologise if any of the audio quality is bad, levels are off, or if anything about the video is sort of a little bit awkward. That'll be buffed out over the coming episodes as I kind of watch them back and I start editing these videos. So immediately, those of you eagle-eyed people who've watched the first episode and you're now on this second episode, obviously first of all thank you very much for coming back to watch another episode. But secondly, you may notice that I've made a few changes around here. So one of the obvious ones is I've cleared a lot more space, especially in this area. I've cleared away a lot of trees all around this kind of zone, and also up on this hill. I've also smoothed out a lot of this terrain. I removed a couple of layers back here, and I've just made things look a little bit nicer and neater. I've smoothed out this area here, I've highlighted this in blue, and I've added some green wool all around along here. I'm just going to quickly go over what these chunks of wool mean, and then we're going to go about sort of planning out what we're going to be doing this episode. So if we start with these green bits of wool here. Now, when I finished this stream, one of the things I really wanted to do, let's just quickly make sure that weather's gone, because I'm not a big fan of the rain in this game. But what I wanted to do is create kind of a very, not cramped, but I wanted to frame this kind of view here. I think this is a nice view down the river, and as you'll see later in this episode, we're going to be building up a bridge in this area. So I want this to be a key view that you're looking at. I want this to be somewhere that your eye is drawn to. Now, in order to frame this off, I could put buildings along the side of this, but that's not the feel I'm going for. I want to go for a very sparse village, somewhere that's very quiet, sleepy. Only a few buildings are going to be here. It's going to be quite a bit of farmland, and everything's going to be pretty spaced out. So what I wanted to put in here instead is some trees, or some sort of plants, some foliage anyway, just to kind of frame off this area. So the idea would be to have kind of a tree that maybe kind of comes out over here and it hangs over and frames off that waterfall there. So that shape there, we're going to get rid of it for the time being and just leave that one piece of green wall. Now, the reason I've marked this out is because we will be planning out our pathways, farms, and buildings today. That's one of the big things I want to achieve for today's episode. Maybe a little bit of a shorter episode, but still very important to go over the simple concepts of planning your builds before you actually start. So I want to make sure that I've got enough room to deal with these trees. You know, there's going to be a radius where there's going to be some leaves, there might be stuff hanging around it. I might want to do stuff around the base of the tree, put benches looking over the water, stuff like that. So essentially this is going to mean that I'm going to need to leave a few blocks between this tree and whatever I put here. It may be that I put nothing in this space after all, but at least I know that there's going to be something there, and I should try and avoid that zone. So I'm going to put a couple there, and there's going to be 3 around this side. Not necessarily all leaning over the water. A couple of them probably will be, maybe those 2 will, and one of these. But these are going to be larger custom trees. I will also put some vanilla trees around the place, or some smaller custom trees dotted around, maybe some bushes, but these just indicate where I think some bigger trees are going to go. Now that I look at it, I think this is also going to be a really good location for a big tree. This could maybe be some sort of willow tree. I think that would be a really nice effect and really fit in with the vibe we're going to go for here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to look at is just the blue. Now, if you remember from last episode, I used the blue to highlight where we're going to take the river. Now, I've continued this on a little bit to show the direction of where I want to take that river. I don't think I'm going to be building much over here, but over time I will be building out this river, and it will go on out into the distance. Now here, this isn't part of the river, but I did want to add another water feature here. I do think that it would be nice to have a lake, and maybe add a little fishing hut either side of this lake. This will be a cool area that the villagers come here, and maybe this is going to be their main source of food. Maybe they do a lot of fishing, or maybe that's even one of their businesses. Maybe there's a certain type of fish that only goes here, and that's sort of how they make some of their money. Now, before we crack on with this episode any further, I do just want to explain a couple of things that I've been thinking about this series. And one of the things I want to achieve with this series is to have something that's quite long running, and I also want it to be very dynamic. Now, if I end up building a couple of cities, for example, I might decide that there's some sort of lore to it, and maybe they're some sort of enemy factions, and they go to war sometime. I might build some trebuchets, I might, to indicate that they're at war. Then I might decide that one of the factions has won that war, and I might end up tearing down some of the buildings or making them on fire and showing that area is now being taken over by the warring faction. So I really want this world to be, it's all going to be in one creative world, but I really want it to feel like it's dynamic and it's evolving and changing as the series goes along. So anything that you see here, don't get too attached to, just in case it does get changed at any point in time. But the first thing I'm going to start off with is just a very simple village. Like I said, I only want 2-3 houses maybe, some fields, just some very simple stuff. So the first thing I'm going to map out is just going to be a village, sorry. It's just going to be a simple bridge for this village. There's no way they can currently get over this river, so I want to fix that. So, considering the axis this river is on, I don't really want to go straight across here. Let's just show you what that would look like. Okay, so this orange wall would represent the bridge. Now, you can see, in terms of the terrain itself, this terrain naturally filters down in this direction, and then it curves off and goes this sort of way. If you look at it from above, that's a little bit more obvious. You can see how the terrain lowers and goes down to this area and up to that area, and that's when it starts to raise again. This naturally brings your eye to look at this sort of axis. So that's kind of what we want to mirror there. It's not going to be a 45 degree. It's probably going to be maybe 2 blocks across at a time, and as I say that, the weather comes back in force. So let's try this for the time being. Okay, and see what that looks like from above. Okay, I think that's pretty close to what we're trying to achieve here. So let's have a quick look. If we wanted to make the bridge 3 wide, what would that look like? Okay, you know what? I think that's just about the perfect angle that we want to run for. We could make some tweaks and bring it over this way a little bit, but I do think with the size, the actual scale of it, we're going to lose a little bit of the detail we'll be able to put into it. So I'm going to leave it like this for the time being, and this is going to be our plan for where the bridge goes. Now, the next thing I want to define are going to be some paths and some buildings. So let's quickly have a look at that. The block I'm going to define paths with is going to be yellow, and in terms of the buildings, I'm going to go with the pink. So let's get cracking with this. So first of all, I think I'm going to design the paths, and one area I want to lead up to is the little fishing lake that we designed. So let's just quickly bring this over here, and maybe it goes up round, all the way around the back of the fish pond and stops up there. Let's have a look at how that curve would look. So you can see, I've placed blocks far apart, but you can kind of see that there's a curve developing, and it goes off there. I think I'm happy with that curve. Now, I also want to get up into this area because I think I'm going to put 2 buildings up here. So I think the path, ideally, is going to curve up around here and go down the middle. So let's quickly work out what that's going to look like. So I think this is the point where I want to split the path off. And I think for the time being, it's going to curve off this way a little bit, and then it's going to come back quite sharply, and we're just going to use our fly to create a natural curve. And you know what? I'm kind of happy with that. It's maybe not the best gradient, but we can fix that as we go along like we did with parts of the river. So I'm kind of happy with that. I don't think I need anything else. I'm going to put a house here. I'm probably going to put a house up against this cliff. Probably some farmland here and here. So I think most of this area is going to be sort of covered there. I think the only other place I would like to put a house is up in this sort of area here, kind of nestled amongst this. Obviously the terrain at the moment doesn't really lend itself to a house, but we can make amends to that to make sure that that does function the way we want it to. So we're going to bring the path up here where I said our eye was naturally drawn to, and I'm actually just going to bend the path right, kind of almost back on itself. So if we fly up, I think this is kind of all we're going to start with for our pathing here. Now, I've had a quick look at this from above, and I think I'm actually going to make a couple of amends to this, because I'm not quite happy with how it's turned out. So let's quickly do that, and I think those few changes, it's going to make it a bit smoother. Yep, I'm much more happy with that actually. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just put some footprints in for the houses. So let's have a look. Let's fly over here first, and I think this is roughly going to be the corner of our first building. So I think we're going to go 10 blocks out this way. So that'll be 11 in total. And then to go across, I think we're going to be looking at, let's see 7 first. Okay, so I think that footprint I'm pretty happy with. It's going to kind of come out this way a little bit, so it's going to go up and then it's going to go out so you get a nice view over the water. So let's quickly close that off and make a rectangle. Now one thing I do think I would like to do is make this a little bit more irregular, so let's go 3 blocks in from here, either side, and we'll come 3 blocks out. Now that will form a nice little footprint for our build to start on. This will be the foundation. Okay, let's just have a little fly around and have a look at it from a few different angles. Yep, I think I'm pretty comfortable with that. Now I want to put a diagonal house in here. I think I'm going to put it on a 45-degree angle. And I think the corner is going to be roughly, probably around this area. So again, I think I'm going to go 7 wide. And yep, that's going to be roughly right. But I think I'm going to go 9 long here and make it a little bit more square. Have a look at those. Okay, yeah, I'm actually really happy with the size of those buildings. I think that this one might actually be a little bit too big, so I'm actually going to bring this in 2 blocks here. And let's have a look how that looks. Okay, yeah, that is much better. It's a little bit narrow potentially, but I think I want to keep the odd number of blocks here, so I don't want to extend it by 1. So the other location I'm looking at is here. Now, we've got one off axis here, we've got another one here that's kind of on its axis. I think I'm going to do another on axis here. I think eventually, looking at it now, there probably will be a few other buildings. I think a fishing hut would still be a good idea, and maybe this area could do with a little bit of a building. Maybe a little farmhouse, and there could be some animals located there. But for the time being, we're just going to put our blocks down here. So, so looking at 11 blocks wide there, and then I think I'm going to do a square shape here actually. And let's have a quick look what that looks like. Ignore the way that it's rising up here for the time being. If we get above it, we're going to get a much better indication of what it looks like. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that footprint, but what I wanted to do is bring it out this side and that side as well. So I'm going to come in 2 blocks. I'm going to come out 3. I apologise if my keyboard's loud as well. It has been pointed out to me on Discord before, so hopefully at some point I will be getting some keycap softeners for this as well. So let's have a look at what this is going to give us. Okay, let's get above it because it's not really giving us a good indication yet. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. Okay, so we've got one house over there, one house over here, and one house here. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is just some off-camera work. I'm going to carve out these paths. I'm going to decide on a block and lay it down here along these paths, make them 2 or 3 wide, roughly. And I'm going to build the foundations for these, and then I'll come back to you. So, path and foundations done. I think they've turned out pretty good actually. I'm happy with the width of them. It's a little bit sort of wonky in some places. This is maybe a little bit too straight, so there's maybe some amends we can be making. But I've got the path tapering off a little bit around the back there. This is probably going to continue around here, and I'll probably have to have a path coming this way, or continue that all the way around to the fishing hut. I'm not really sure what I want to do with that yet, so that's okay, that's for a future episode. But for now, what I want to actually do is look at these foundations. I had a quick look at the recording and realised that we've already ran quite long on this episode, so if anybody's taking a look at my inventory, I'm sure you can give a rough idea of what we're going to do. So with these foundations, I want these to actually end up being the cellars of the properties. This is where I want people to store sort of grain, wine and stuff like that for the winter, and the living quarters and everything is actually going to be sitting on top. So what I'm actually going to do, just to round off this episode, is to come up with a very simple design just for these foundations, just to make them look a little bit more interesting. So the first thing I want to actually do is just mark out the corners with polished andesite. This is something quite simple you can do in any of your builds really. Just gives it a tiny little bit more detail, just draws the eye in a little bit more, and it defines the corners of the buildings nicely, which is what we're looking to do in this instance. So now that I've done that, I've got this interior space to work with. So what I'm actually going to do is punch a 3 wide hole out here, and I am going to make this small arch area, and I'm just going to put cobblestone behind it. This is a design I use quite frequently. I think it's really simple, but I also think that it just looks really, really nice. It's quite a clean design, but I like it. So here we've also got a 3 wide section that we can make use of, so let's copy the design over here. And like this. Okay, it's starting to look nicely already. Now we've got these corners that are going to be a little bit barren at the moment, so we may want to revisit them in a second, but for now, let's leave them as they are. So here, let's have a look. If we had a 3 wide here and a 3 wide here, we have 1 in the middle. I think I'm okay with that. Let's quickly knock these out and put these down. And the same here. Okay, brilliant. And let's just pop these down here. Again, just a really simple design, but it does bring a lot to the build. Okay, yep, I think I'm quite happy with that. I think that's at the same level all around. Yep. Okay, brilliant. Because we want this 1 block all the way around the top, because this is where we're actually going to be starting to step the build out a little bit before we go up. So, and then on the back side here, we can just mirror what we did on the front side. So let's pop this here, here. Bring this cobble up. And let's put that slab down. I think we've got the slab down here. Yep, perfect. Okay, the only other thing I'd like to do here is just to quickly fill in these gaps with cobblestone. Because when we come to do the interiors of these builds, we are going to find it's going to be much easier to design if the cobble is all filled up. And I think what we'll do with this wall is actually just make this stone brick. And then that way we've got just a little highlight wall. And there'll probably be something that sits here and it will just pop out a little bit. Okay, let's have a quick look to see what that looks like. I think I'm quite happy with that. Now, what I'm going to do now is add some block variation. So we've got a simple design. I'm relatively happy with it. It's nothing fancy, but you know, it works for what we need. So what I'm going to do on the corners is I'm going to add some of the mossy stone brick. Now, the mossy stone brick, you would also often find moss would grow in areas where it's sort of dark and a little bit damp. And when you look at a building, quite often you'll have any runoff liquid will run off the building down into sort of the corners. So that's what I'm kind of doing here. Anywhere where I think the water may run off a little bit, I'm just putting some mossy stone. Now around that mossy, I'm just going to apply some cracked stone. But I'm also going to have some cracked stone in areas where it's not so mossy, but primarily near the bottom of this build. Now the reason being is that the stuff nearer the ground would probably be a little bit more worn down or worn out than the others. So that's kind of the intention and the thought process behind putting that there. So again, sometimes it is worth just having a little think about why you're putting some block variation in there. You know, you don't always need to, but sometimes just have a little think, why am I actually putting this here? Is there a good reason for me putting this here? Does it actually make sense being here? The other thing I was thinking about doing was putting some plain andesite in there, just to show that some of these places have maybe been worn down. I want these to be kind